DroneOhio.com.
Our speaker tonight is a air transport pilot, which you know anything about aviation, that's like you get recreational pilot's license, you get an instrument rating. When you're flying people around, that's the highest possible rating you could have. Also been flying model aircraft for over 30 years, and I think a lifetime photographer as well. Is that fair to say? So he's owner of V1 Drone Media. Help me give a warm welcome to Jason Damon.
Thanks. Thanks for coming out. Hopefully I can make some of this entertaining or helpful for, I know some of you. How many in here are doing photography or into photography? Professionally, amateur, hobby, recreational? Yeah? All the above? See if we can give you some tips and pointers, share some of the things that I go through and use. Putting pictures together. Everybody see the screen all right? You need the lights dimmed? Are you good? 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 All right. So a little background about me. I was born and raised in Northwest Ohio, Napoleon, Ohio. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Northwest Ohio, but I grew up in Napoleon. Been flying regular airplanes, manned aircraft since 1998. RC for even prior to that. Grew up in building and flying radio control airplanes, helicopters. I was hired at ExpressJet Airlines in the year 2000. So I've been there for, actually I'm starting my 18th year. 11,000 hours of commercial flight experience. And then, like Matt said, a bit of a hobbyist, recreational background in photography and videography is kind of what really drew me into the whole drone stuff, with everything being in one package. The aviation side and the photography and videography kind of all fit together. So in 2015, I started my company, which is V1 Drone Media. Some of the projects we've worked on, I've worked with Matt, DroneWorks, for different things. A couple of them listed there. Cavs Parade, we shot some of the footage and pictures and everything. Maybe you saw some of it earlier on the slideshow of the 2016 World Series in Cleveland, which I believe is the first one ever, a World Series ever shot by a drone. Right?
That's correct, yeah. First live satellite broadcast from a drone at a World Series.
Yeah, we were actually connected with KYC's van. They bought satellite time, and we were plugged right into the satellite feed.
Up to 27 networks.
Feeding the station.
27 network stations.
Pretty cool. Also did some work doing building inspections, medical mutual building. We did some inspection, getting 4K footage for a company downtown. Doing that, we've experimented with mapping, 3D modeling. I also teach at the Tri-C Drone Academy, if any of you are familiar with that. Done some real estate work, photos, videos, residential, commercial, production company shoots. Recently worked with a production company. They were doing a shot for the Ritz-Carlton downtown. And also the big one right now is working with company shooting aerials for a Netflix documentary here in Cleveland, so it should be pretty cool. It's supposed to be released sometime next year, maybe about another year. So I'm going to try to give you a little bit of, I guess, like an intro to photography and maybe help you step up your game if you're new to it or as a hobbyist recreational photographer. This is kind of a chart that shows, you got your top here, these pictures kind of line up with everything underneath it. So we're going to get into more detail, but to give you the gist, you've got different settings on your camera that will allow you to expose an image properly. Those three things are your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO. So those three things work in combination for you to get a correct exposure whenever you're shooting an image. And depending on how you have these set is going to depend on what type of image you're going to capture. So, and we'll come back to that chart at some point later. So explain each one. Simply put, your aperture is basically the hole in the lens where the light is going to travel through to come into the camera body. And that aperture, you can either tighten it down or you can open it up. Opening it up meaning you got a wide aperture. Obviously, the wider the aperture is, the more light's going to come into the camera. The smaller that hole is, the less light's going to come into the camera. That setting is typically set on your camera via what's called the f-stop. Is how you set the aperture. And we'll go into all these so you get a little bit better idea. So your aperture, so how many using DJI? That's good because that's what the slides are. So in your DJI, you should be familiar with the DJI Go app. Here's how you're going to set some of these. Your aperture setting, now this wouldn't apply to the Mavic Pro because you don't have an aperture setting on the Mavic. You only have shutter speed and ISO. But if you have like a Phantom 4 Pro or an Inspire, you'd have the ability to change your aperture. So you've got 3 settings that you can change. On the Mavic, it would only be shutter speed and ISO. You would change that under the aperture. So these numbers, you can scroll through them. The lower the number, the higher or the more amount of light you're allowing to come into the camera body. The higher the number, you're squeezing that aperture down and allowing less light to come in. And then up here, you've got the other settings here, the ISO, your aperture, and your shutter speed. I think we go through these a little bit more. Also, yeah, so the smaller your aperture is, meaning the higher the number you have set in here, the longer depth of field you have. So your aperture actually controls the depth of field you're going to get from the camera.
Why is the higher number a smaller aperture?
I didn't invent it. I don't know. It does get a little bit confusing. So the higher the number you set in your aperture, it's actually the smaller the hole is for the light to come in. The lower the number, the wider your aperture is. So like I said too, that's also controlling the depth of field that your camera sees. So if you ever see these pictures where you got a nice crisp image up front but like the background's blurred, that's all due to like depth of field. And that's all can be controlled through your aperture settings. So if you want a longer depth of field where more stuff is all in focus, you can adjust that through your aperture settings. A lot of this will take experimenting and all that, but I'm giving you a basic idea of how it works. ISO is basically the sensitivity of your sensor to light. The lower the ISO number, the less sensitive it's going to be to light, and the higher you set the number, the more sensitive it's going to be. The problem is that you're going to run into is the higher also that you set that number, you're going to introduce noise into the sensor as well. So, which can become an issue shooting at night per se, where you're trying to raise that ISO up to a given number to get the correct exposure, but you're also introducing a whole lot of noise coming into the image as well.
Maybe you can explain noise, because I mean, for those, it sounds like sound otherwise. Right?
Yeah.
What do you mean by noise?
I don't know if I have it on here.
The best way to do it would be grain.
It's basically the image is losing quality. You're losing image quality. The higher that ISO number is set. A lot of the DJI equipment, for the most part, you could probably get away with 1600. I've heard maybe even 32, but I think that's really pushing it. There are programs and stuff that you can use to help reduce the noise and things like that, but you know, once you start getting above 1600 ISO, the ISO works as it goes from 100 to 200, 400, 800, 16, so it doubles every time. And every time you double that number, it's basically doubling the sensitivity to light coming into the camera. Does that all, am I making sense so far? hopefully. All right. So this is kind of a chart to give you an idea. It's kind of what I was just saying. So your ISO settings, you know, depending on the amount of light that you're shooting in, if you're in like a full sun day, like mid-afternoon, and there's no clouds, you're going to want to be at like 100 ISO because you're going to reduce, you know, the noise. You're going to get the most clean image, not introducing any noise, and you're going to want that as low as possible so you can bring your shutter speed down as well, or instead of being higher on the ISO. So anyway, so this goes in order. So from the most sunny, and as you come on down, so like it says 400, if you're in like the shade on a sunny day or under a covered area on a forecast day, overcast day, you may need to bump your ISO up a little bit so that you're getting more light to come into the camera because you're in a shaded area. And that just goes on. You can see here, like I was saying, noise warning. When you start getting around the 800 ISO area, especially on the small censored cameras like that are on the DJI drones, you're going to really start seeing the noise come in anything above 800, 1600. So again, on the DJI app, this is where you'd set your ISO, and again it's going to double, so 100, 200, 400, 800, 1632 up to 64. And you got your aperture setting, shutter speed. So your shutter speed, also known as the exposure time, stands for the length of time the camera shutter is open to expose the light coming into the sensor. So you've got your ISO set to tell your sensor how sensitive it's going to be to the light coming in. You've got your aperture set, whether it's wide open or closed, depending on what your light source is. And now you're setting your shutter speed as to how long you want that light coming in being exposed to the sensor. If the shutter speed is fast, it can help to freeze action completely. So, you know, sports photography, anything like that, where people are running around and balls are flying and, you know, things are happening like really quick, you would want to have a fast shutter speed, right? Because you don't want any blurred images. As people are moving, you need to have that shutter speed, pick that up as fast as possible and freeze that motion. As you bring your shutter speed down and make it slower, you're going to start getting what's called motion blur. So as people are running around, if your exposure time isn't fast enough, that's where you start seeing as they're running, you see kind of like their arm, like the motion that their arms were making and their legs were making as they were running. And that's due to your shutter speed being, you know, a bit too slow. Where moving objects appear blurred in the direction of the motion. So again, that's your shutter speed down here. Now, we'll put this all together here in just a minute, but to backtrack a little bit, the way these can be set, you can set them all manually. So you can set exactly what you want your ISO to be, you can set exactly what you want your aperture to be, and you can set what your shutter speed is going to be. You can set each one on its own. Or there's 3 different other modes. So that, what I just described, would be in manual. You're telling the camera, I want this to be this to be this, and this to be this. Take the picture. You could also say, I want my shutter speed to be this. I don't care what anything else is set at. I just need a shutter speed of this. And the camera says, okay, I'll give you that shutter speed, but in order for me to do it with the amount of light that I'm sensing, I need to have my aperture set at this, and I need my ISO to be set at this. So it's going to take care of the other 2. Does that make sense? And the other one is aperture. These are called, this is shutter priority. This is called aperture priority. Aperture priority works the same as shutter priority, but you're setting the aperture where you're saying, I want the aperture to be this, you take care of the rest. And the camera will say, okay, for that aperture and this light, your shutter speed is going to be this, and your ISO is going to be this to get a properly exposed image.
Could you give some examples of how you, are you coming to that, where you use aperture priority and shutter priority?
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially maybe
We're gonna
specific.
get in, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah.
getting ahead of you. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
And then your last one here, which a lot of people, especially if you're, you know, especially new to like DJI equipment and stuff, your camera's gonna come in like just auto, full auto. So you take it out of the box, you set it all up, and your camera's in auto. The camera's just doing everything. It's just saying, I'm gonna expose this image, and in order to do that, I'm gonna set your ISO here, this, there. And all you have to worry about is just clicking the shutter. So those are your 4 modes if you have aperture setting. If you don't have the aperture setting, so like if you have a Mavic. Anybody in here have a Mavic before we keep talking about it? Okay, yeah. You wouldn't have the aperture. So you're just going to have shutter and ISO. So you wouldn't have this aperture priority because there's no aperture on a Mavic.
It's just fixed.
Yeah. So to give some examples, I talked about motion blur. So this is a shot I went home a couple years ago. My brother works in the fields, so he's up and working in the fields, and I had the drone out there taking some different shots. So I was trying to match him in speed, and I kept trying to get it to where it was, you know, a nice focused image. And this one, it doesn't look maybe quite as good on the screen here, but if you could see the clearer image on the computer, this is all in focus, but you can see the motion that the tractor was making going through the field. So these are like kind of, you know, things to think about, where I told you, like, when you play with these different settings, you can set your shutter so that I want this to be a little bit longer than normal because I don't want to freeze the motion completely. I want to see like the motion going through the field, but I want that tractor to be in focus. So you got to match them so that that tractor's not moving in the frame of the camera, right? So if you match them, you get it just right, you know, you can get, it looks like the tractor's real crisp and clean, but you get the motion of the field going by. Here's another one I did a few weeks ago. Same type of thing, but this time I'm holding still, and there's traffic going along down here. These are cars driving. I'm over a lot over here. So, same type of technique, but this time I'm holding still and capturing, you know, everything here being still, but the cars going by. That's how you get those cars where you see the headlights like going down a street or something like that. It's all from the shutter being open longer and capturing that light as it goes across the lens. So putting it all together, so this is your f-stop. Like I said, where the lower the number, the wider open that hole is for the light to come through into the camera body. As you increase that upwards, you're shutting down that aperture, squeezing it in, where you're letting less light in. These images up here correlate to how you would have your shutter set. So as, like I said, your depth of field on a lower or wide open aperture, you can see like the person at front is more in focus, whereas the background's blurred. But as you come up, you know, set your aperture higher, your depth of field goes way out, and you're getting the whole image more in focus, where everything's in focus, as opposed to, it's called bokeh, where you get that blurred background type look. And then this down here is what we just talked about too, the motion blur. So this is showing, like, as an example, like if your shutter speed's like 1/1000th of a second, you're freezing time and you're catching that runner, you know, right where he's crisp and clean and in focus without any blur happening. But as you start coming down in your shutter speed, you know, at some point where your shutter's open real long, everything's just blurred. You can't make out anything. And then this is your ISO. The lower your ISO, the cleaner the image, and as you start coming up, 800, you really start to see the noise coming in. These little dots are kind of the representation of what noise would be being introduced into the image. And this is like a really high ISO where the image just looks horrible. Is this all making sense? Yeah? All right. So using, why you would use like a priority, aperture priority mode, or a shutter priority. If you were trying to freeze, I'll tell you mostly what I do is I typically will shoot an aperture priority, because I'll set what I need to for my light to be right for the lighting conditions, so that my shutter speed's somewhat decent. Because I can set, if you're in aperture priority, when you're setting these, you can see what the drone is trying to set for your shutter speed. So you'll know if it's too slow or not. And if it's too slow, maybe you need to bring your aperture down a little bit so that it bumps your shutter speed up a little, so that you're capturing what you need to. So if I'm trying to get like that image prior, where the cars are driving down the road, and I want a longer shutter speed for that, I would just adjust my f-stop to where maybe I need like a 1.5 second shutter speed or something like that. You could do it that way, or you can do it all manually too. Some of this may sound Greek, and I hope I'm explaining it the best I can, but the best thing you can do is just go in and play with it. If you've got the basics down, it doesn't take that much to put it all together, and maybe this kind of helps make it a little more clear too. It's called the exposure triangle, and this would be your ISO setting, your shutter speed, and your aperture. As you change each one of these, it has an effect on the other. So if you bump your ISO from 100 to 400, that means that much more light is coming into the sensor, right? Well, if that light is way too much for the sensor, it's going to have to either change the shutter speed or the aperture to compensate. Make sense? Because if you're trying to tell it, I want my ISO set at 400, then it's going to say, well, it's a clear, bright day, it's way too bright, so your shutter speed is going to either be really fast, and or I'm going to have to raise your aperture, or make your aperture smaller to compensate, so that I'm not blowing out that image when I take it. And you can look this up. You can Google it too if you want to look at it more or what. But the exposure triangle. All of this is really the key into getting like the best image that you can take, because your exposure is like the key. You want the cleanest, best exposed image when you're taking the shot, because you can't go back and fix it later. That sunset, once it's set, it's done, it's gone. So you want to try to get it, have everything set and get it the best you can, properly exposed while you're out there with the sun setting. Composition is another huge aspect of photography. Once you've got all the other things down and you have a good understanding of how to set the camera, get the proper exposure and things like that, composition is probably the biggest thing that will set your images apart from everybody else. And that is just, it's a way of setting up your image so that you're guiding the viewer's eyes toward or along the most important elements of your work. The use of leading lines, symmetry, focus, the depth of field that we talked about, and the rule of thirds are some of the key components to creating interesting composition. Anybody heard of rule of thirds? You have? Yeah. So the rule of thirds is basically if you overlaid, I think I have. Yeah, among other. So the rule of thirds is essentially if you, and I've got some examples coming up, if you overlaid a grid, 2 lines down and 2 across, kind of like a tic-tac-toe board. If you laid it across the image, that's your rule of thirds. You've got a lower third, a middle, and a top. And you've got the same thing going across this way. Your left, your middle, and your right. And you can use that rule of thirds to frame your image to really give it a unique look. And this is like, there's a whole, you can read all about the rule of thirds and why it's appealing to like the human eye and things like that. But I'm going to pop up 2 images here. I just want to experiment because this will be interesting. I've never done this. I want you to pay attention as soon as the image pops up and you look at it. Where do your eyes go and where do they end? Where do they end up in the image? Like in the first second that you see it. You ready? Go. How many people started down here? How many people started up here? How many people ended here? How many people ended up here? So basically, from what I could see, is the ones that started down here, did you follow on up this way? And the ones that started up here kind of follow on down that way? More or less. I mean, not exactly, but kind of, yeah, sort of, maybe. Let's try one more. Ready? Whose eyes started over here? Who started up here? And did you end down here? And the one started down here, ended up here? Yeah? Do you see what I'm getting at? And we're going to show some examples why. But you see the lines that are created to kind of guide your eyes along the image. You got another one here. And the same thing in the other one, which I kind of showed you already. But you got these leading lines that kind of take you along that path in the image. Whether it's one way or the other, doesn't really matter, but it kind of, you have a tendency to follow that path. Rule of thirds, so I'll show you some examples of that. So the rule of thirds is applied by aligning a subject with guidelines and intersecting points. Placing the horizon on the top or bottom line, allowing linear features in the image to flow from section to section. Here's what it looks like. Like I said, the grid. And you can see you got your right, your middle, your left, your bottom, your middle, your top. And how you can frame that image so that you've got stuff in the right column, but in this image you don't have anything on the left too. Then you've got the land on the lower thirds, and then nothing, the lighthouse in the top two. Here's another example. And this one you've got the land on the lower, in the middle you've got the water coming in, and this one they've got the sky starting right off the top of the upper thirds. And then these intersecting points can also be used. And this one they've got the foreground being like a shell sitting on the beach. One more. You can see how they really did this. You got the city, the water, everything in the lower thirds. You're starting to get the sky, right in the middle, the sky at the top, and then they used, their intersecting points to get the Statue of Liberty, and you've got the building there at the other intersecting point. All right, camera profiles. So along with the shooting and you're getting the correct exposure and all that stuff, you understand the shutter speed, your aperture settings and all that, you can get good exposure. There's a couple other settings that you can use specific to DJI equipment, and that is these settings here. When you click the box down here for all your settings in your camera, it'll pull up this, and you hit the camera button, the middle menu there, and you've got photo, image size, format, white balance, style, and color. Photo is just, you can pick whether you want it in JPEG or RAW. JPEG files, if you're not doing any post-production, you want nothing to do with it, and you just want to take pictures and share them with your friends or whatever, and you don't care about doing anything afterwards, JPEG's probably the way to go. RAW files are what you can take then and put them into like Lightroom, Photoshop, things like that, and like really go crazy with them, touch them up and change colors and do all kinds of stuff. The difference between the two, JPEG's going to be a smaller file size. RAW is going to be much bigger because it's just, the way I compare it is JPEG, basically you're taking a picture, which is like the ingredients for the camera. It says, okay, you want that? All right. Here, let me make it. Boom, here it is. Here's a JPEG file. It basically cooks that image it creates the colors and everything and bakes it all in, and it hands it over. Shooting a raw image allows you to have all the ingredients that you can take in then into post-production, and you can take all those ingredients and bake your picture exactly how you want it to be, without the camera just guessing or putting it out there like all baked in. Does that make sense? Yeah, kind of.
That's a good analogy.
Actually, that's the image format down here.
The top one allows you to take the burst, 3 or 5.
Okay, yeah. So the top one is whether you just want single photo, whether you want a burst photo. You can also do bracketed photos, which I'll show you in a minute. Your white balance is set down here. White balance is another big thing. For photography, you can, if you're shooting raw images, you can pretty much leave it on auto white balance. And what auto white balance is the camera's seeing the image, and it's doing its best to create, make the image so that your whites are truly white by setting the color temperature. You also have settings in here when you click this that are presets for like sunny day, cloudy day. If you're in a certain type of lighting, you can click that, and it'll automatically adjust so that when you take the image, that it takes into account for those lighting conditions. So that is really important, especially when doing video. Big tip is when you're doing video, never use auto white balance. Because when you're shooting video and you're going around, and as you change the scene that the camera's seeing, what looks one color to it here, and as you go over, you could watch that video later and you'll see like a flicker or something happen. And that's the camera changing your white balance in the middle of you shooting video. So I would suggest highly that if you're shooting on a sunny day, just set it to sunny. Or in all honesty, it doesn't even really matter if you're doing post-production on it anyway, because you can change that all in post. But if you're not, I would still suggest, using one of those presets, whether it's sunny, cloudy, or whatever it is. Get it as close as you can and just use that. And just that way it keeps your white balance the same throughout your whole shot. Here's white balance, kind of a little bit better explained. It's all measured in Kelvin. Okay, Kelvin is like the measurement for temperature. You got down here like your reds, all the way up to your blue, starting at 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. And these are actually the numbers that are set in the camera. So like the preset for like a sunny day, I believe is maybe like 5,500 or something like that on the DJI, which is like midday sun. Yeah, midday sun, 5,500. Cloudy sky, they're saying the color temperature would usually be 6,500. That would be how your eye perceives that color. So that's what you would set in that your white balance. And there's actually an option in there too that you can manually set exactly what you want it to be. So if you want it to be set at 5,000, you can set 5,000 in there instead of using those presets. So a few more. Oh, actually here. So these are the presets. This is the white balance menu. So you either have auto, sunny, cloudy, incandescent lighting. I don't know, or fluorescent lighting. Or custom. So if you click on the custom, you have a little slider that you can just adjust in exactly what you want it to be. You may even be able to type it in, I can't remember, but put in like 5,500 or whatever you'd want. It's really important, like I said, for video, to make sure that that's a constant value, that it's not going to change on you while you're shooting a scene. Your style menu, this is another menu under the camera settings. And this just is slight tweaks to like your sharpening, contrast, and your saturation, where you can slightly tweak how when the image is captured, if you want to boost the sharpness or the saturation or lower it or whatever you want to do, you can do that in here on each one of these. And you can either go up to like +3 or -3 on each. So it's a way, if you want your image to be more saturated or less saturated, maybe it's giving it too much, you can come in here and you can bump these down or tweak them however you'd want them to be. And they have some already preset, like standard landscape. They've got +1, +1, 0. soft, or they've lowered the sharpening just a bit, or you can set your own. Color profiles is another one. You've got all these different color profiles in here, and what that does is it sets how the image is going to look, like for video. It's not going to matter. I mean, it will matter. These will matter if you're shooting just JPEG. You should go out and just try each one. You know, shoot each one in order, the same shot. Try the different color profiles and see which one you like the best. This isn't going to matter if you're doing raw. If you're doing raw and you're going to take it into post-production anyway, it's not going to matter, because it doesn't matter what these put in. You're going to take your own ingredients, like I said earlier, and you're going to make it how you want anyway. So it doesn't really matter what this is going to be set at. For video, though, it will make a difference, because some of these are going to be, they're just overboard, depending on what you're doing. The two that I would use the most, the one I use the most is the D-Log, because that's going to give you the most dynamic range. So you're, if you have like a scene you're shooting where there's kind of dark shadows and stuff down here, but as you go up and the sky is real bright, that's a lot of range that camera is trying to capture, to keep detail in all the shadows, along with the detail in all the highlights. So it's got to find, you know, that's a lot of dynamic range for that little sensor to capture. D-Log allows you to, it does that, it kind of compresses that down and helps you to keep the detail in the highlights and the shadows. So that's one I would recommend for if you're doing any type of post-production. If not, like I said, play with the other ones and just see which one you like the best. There's a lot of different ones on there that you can play with. Rule of thirds, there's actually a grid in here. So if you go one menu over, the little gear, you've got a bunch of options here that you can turn on while you're flying or taking pictures or whatever. You got the histogram that you can turn on, which is a little histogram at the bottom. You all know what a histogram is, right? You can see the light values if the image is looking underexposed or overexposed or whatever. You can turn a little histogram on, that'd be down here. Your overexposure warning you can turn on, and that'll tell you if you're losing detail in like highlights, that the image is just way too bright. It's going to actually paint like little red dots all over where that image would be too bright. And that's like a visual cue right on the picture itself, your live feed, that it's showing you this is too bright, and maybe you're going to have to, you know, speed up your shutter speed or do something, change your aperture, whatever. But a big one is the grid. So you can actually overlay that grid, like I showed you earlier, the rule of thirds, and have that right on your tablet. So as you're flying around, you can, you know, maybe you've got a shot in mind or whatever, you can have that grid overlay right on your tablet and kind of line up stuff and see what looks right. Maybe pull back a little bit and turn left or whatever, and use that rule of thirds to get you a nice composition. These other ones down here, like a center points, this just gives you a center point on the screen along with that rule of thirds. You can play with that. Anti-flicker, you can leave it in auto. Yeah.
Are you actually using that grid function, or are you just taking the picture and then in post you're moving it around to where you feel is
you
the
could
best?
do that too.
Well,
I do
what
this.
What are you doing? You use the grid?
I use the grid.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, at this point, I have a pretty good idea, but I just always have it on. I mean, I don't even know that it's really on anymore, but it always kind of keeps it in your head, like, you know, is there a better composition there? Like, maybe you could, you know, if you go this way a little bit, or pan up, or tilt up a little bit, whatever, and you get the perfect, you know what I mean?
Okay.
Like, it's just kind of a guide, like, so that it's always on there, that you can get a better idea. But then you could do, like you're saying, you shot an image, and a lot of times if you crop stuff down and crop it in, you know, you realize, like, wow, that looks a lot better, you know, that you could do that too. And actually, does anybody in here use, like, Photoshop, Lightroom? Hopefully, yeah. So, use Lightroom?
I have both Photoshop and Lightroom.
So, like Lightroom, when you go in and you do that, you go to the crop, that lays that grid right on there, right?
Right. I was just curious because I
pull
don't shoot with. I don't even know if I have the option to have the grid, but I don't shoot with that on. I was just curious because I've taken it like, oh, you know, I don't like how it looks, and then crop it and move it to, like, you know, the thirds of how I like how it looks.
It's absolutely another thing you can do. Yeah. All right. Questions on any of this? Yeah.
Two things. One, what do you edit with? Video, I should say.
Video,
Yeah.
Premiere Pro.
Okay. Do you, and when you're shooting in D-Log, are you using LUTs, or how are you setting
Yes.
the color?
Yes.
So do you just find some that you like that work, or do you have presets that you use that you got somewhere?
Yeah, for the most part. I experiment all the time. I think it's key to kind of, you never know what you're going to be able to create, like, unless you just start playing with stuff, right? There are certain ones that I would use a majority of the time, especially if it's something quick that I need to put together, whatever, and I just want it done, that I know I can go to this, whatever, pull it in, put a S-curve, whatever, do all that, and then just be done with it. But I do like to take stuff at times and just try different ones, see what you like, because what does it look like, tweak it. But yeah, I do, it's Premiere Pro. Anybody else using Premiere Pro? Yeah. Adobe? Everybody's mostly Adobe stuff, right? Yeah. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah. Do you use any of the presets that come with it?
Some. I've created my own. You can make your own.
I've not found the presets.
There are some. What I would do is take the presets. You know what he's talking about? Presets like in Lightroom. There's the presets up on the left side. We may get into it if we have time. Take those, put them on. If you don't like it, tweak it, play with it, whatever, change it, and just, whatever you want. You may be surprised what you end up, take that foundation and just build upon it, and then you can save that preset, if you know how. Save that preset and make it your own. It's a great way to do it. Any other questions? No? I think we covered this. Image types, RAW versus JPEG. Anybody have questions on that? Clear as mud? Yeah. Kind of. All right, HDR. So, what I was talking about earlier with having a wide dynamic range. So you've got like you said, like a shadowy area down here. Then we start getting up into the sun, and it's really bright up here. You're trying to get the most detail out of both of those without either blowing out the image or having the exposure so low that you're crushing all the blacks. One way to do that is you shoot an HDR image, which stands for high dynamic range. So like a shot like this, you got the sun shining like right at you, even though it's setting, but this was all pretty dark. You got the sun here, and then again kind of not as light up here. One way that you can do that, help fix that, is you shoot what's called bracketed mode. So you could shoot, you can do like 3, 5, 7 pictures at the same time. And what it does is it'll take one shot where it's exposed where it should be, and then it takes another shot like 2/3 of a stop less, and another shot 2/3 of a stop higher, and then either another shot that is even further less, and then another shot higher. So you have your shot that's perfectly exposed or best exposed, and then you've got a darker one and a lighter one, and then an even darker one and an even lighter one. And you take all those pictures, you combine it all together, so you're getting the best of the highlights and the best of the blacks, the shadows and everything, the most detail in all of it, and you're putting it all together as one image. I guess that's where we get into what time is it? Are we doing all right on time?
7:02.
Yeah.
Oh, we got it. Yeah, all time. All right, so I'll show you real quick how to do this. Have you guys worked with HDR? The ones that have been using, so you're familiar. If I can close the. There we go. All right, so here's an image. I've got these 3 images down here. Actually, this is the one I already made. So remove that, delete it. All right, so this is an example. So this is a bracketed image that I took. So it's got one that's perfectly exposed. One that's, you can see how the light changes. One that's not, it's more exposed for the sky, but the pier and everything's kind of real dark. and then another one that's exposed more for the pier, but now your sky's all blown out. You see what I'm talking about? How it's the exposure, you're either exposing for one or the other. Like it's hard to capture all of them. So what you can do is you take all these, all three of them. This is Lightroom, by the way. You take all three of them, you right click, you select them all, you right click, go to Photo Merge and go to HDR. You click it. It's going to take the three photos and it's going to put them all together. Takes a minute, and you got these options over here on the right. You got auto align, auto tone, the deghost amount, and show deghost overlay. What these are is the auto align. You may or may not need it. You can just leave it on. That's going to align each one of those images because again, you're stacking them basically, putting them all together, right? So they need to be lined up. You just leave it on. That'll align them so that they all match. The auto tone. So now it's created this, right? So if you hit auto tone, see what it did? It auto toned the image so that the whole image has the same exposure is essentially what it's done. So there's quite a difference there. Now the thing about it is you're allowing it to decide where all those sliders and everything are going to be put when you're putting it in auto tone. Maybe you like that. I don't know. Maybe you want to do it on your own. If you do, leave it off. Because you can do the exact same thing on your own, and I'll show you. The deghost amount, what this would be used for, can you see the boat? See the boat? The deghost amount, what that's for is like if there's moving objects. So here's the thing, you're taking three shots, right? So 1, 2, 3. Well, if there's a boat going across your frame, where's that boat going to be every time? 1, 2, 3, right? So the deghost amount will realize that was here in this image, it was here in this image, it was here in that image. We can't have the same boat in 3 images and then put them all together and you've got the same boat in 3 different places. So it takes that into account and it'll delete what it needs to make it look like it's just one boat. So if you need a lot of it, you need to set this up from low to medium to high or whatever you need it to be. Yeah?
Can you put that auto on and then you think it's, hey, this is 99% good, and then adjust it from the auto, or if
Absolutely.
you want to adjust anything else, it has to be in?
Nope, you can do whatever you want from here.
Okay.
This is just taking what it put together and you're tweaking it in here how you want it to look before you start working on it. Even if I have that auto tone on and I go into Lightroom, then I can take it right back to how it was manually. You know what I mean? It's just your starting point from once this is, exported from this HDR merge area here. So I'm going to leave it off. So that's what it's going to look like. We got this all done. Show deghost overlay is just going to show you, it's supposed to show you if it catches any of that motion in those pictures that it's overlaying. The show deghost overlay will show like red areas, like, hey, there was motion here, hey, there was motion here, I had to fix these areas. So if you're curious and you can go in and see what it, go back and look and see what it was trying to do or whatever. It's just showing you where there was motion. So we're going to hit merge, and it takes a minute. It creates the image. Or two.
Are those raw files?
Yeah. All right, so it's got this image down here. So we start off with 3 down here, right? Now we got the 4th. And this 4th one, the file name at the end is 523-HDR. That's the image that was created. Now, if I pull it up, you're like, how does that look any different than this? Right? That was just the single image. And here's the HDR image that we just created. So what's the difference? Anybody know? You've got a lot more leeway in this image and a lot more detail that's available to you now than what you did in just that single shot image in itself. And I'll show you. I hope this is interesting, by the way. Teaching you guys something. right, so let's start with this image. This is just one of the images that we took to create the HDR. Now if I take this and I slide this exposure all the way down, that's all the way, I can't go any further down with my exposure, and that's what the image looks like. I still have lost detail in here, and I can't even bring the exposure down all the way to make it completely black, right? If I take the HDR image that we took, now pay attention to this right here. We're at -5, right? If I take the HDR image and I do the same thing to it, it's gone. And look at this, -10. So I've got double the amount of latitude to work with than I did in that regular single image, right? Does that make sense? Do you understand how you can really increase, the capability of what you can do with an image once you've made it into an HDR? From this point, you can go in here then and just do your regular work, whatever you do. Your white balance is up here. We talked about doing white balance. If you shot in RAW and it's way blue like this as it comes out of the camera, you can warm it up. And you can tweak all these however you want. Lower the exposure, take the highlights down, all this different stuff. Like I said, you could make this image look like it did with the auto tone on. There you go. And all that is just from those two little things. You're pulling your highlights down, bring your shadows up, and you're bringing out all that detail into those areas that wouldn't be available to you in just a single shot. Enough on that? You guys sleeping? All right. Be wrapping up here shortly. So, one other thing. Is image stitching and panoramas, which I'll show you that demo real quick. I'm pretty much done unless you guys have questions. Before I do that though, just a couple things with video. I've covered a lot of stuff on like photography and everything like that. If you're doing video, I did mention a few of the things. In order to get the most realistic cinematic looking video, these are some of the settings that you could and or should use. Shutter speed should always be double the inverse of whatever your frame rate is. So if your frame rate, typical motion picture would be shot at 24 frames per second. So every second there's a frame that's being shot. You would want your shutter speed to be double the inverse of that. So 24 frames a second, you'd want a shutter speed of 1/48th of a second per frame. Now you can't set 1/48th of a second on DJI drones. You can set 1/50th, close enough, same thing. But what that allows for is you're getting, like on a fast scene or anything like that, you're allowing just a little bit of motion blur in those areas, which is, you're getting it as close to what your eyes would see it as in real life. So shutter speed double the inverse of where the frame rate is. So that applies 24 frames per second. If you're at 30 frames per second, you'd be at 1/60th. If you're shooting at 60 frames per second, you'd want 1/20th shutter speed. If you're doing any type of post-production, post-coloring, grading and all that stuff, like I said earlier, I would recommend D-Log. It gives you the flattest, most dynamic range of image that you're able to work with, but you can play with that as well. Use of ND filters. You guys aware of ND filters? You know how to use them? Everybody?
How do you determine what filter you're going to use?
It's basic. I mean,
Trial
the
and
amount of
error.
light. If you're able to go in and change aperture, I mean it's pretty easy.
So I guess what I'm asking is, do you kind of guess, put one on, and then check your settings to make sure it's where you want it?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, you do it if you do it a few times or do it enough, like you'll know, like you're gonna need a ND16 or you know, an ND8 or whatever it is. ND filters, is anybody not aware of ND filters? Okay, so ND filters are a filter. It's kind of like sunglasses that you can put on your lens. And what that allows you to do, here's the problem. So shooting video, you're shooting at 24 frames per second. I just told you that ideally you should be at 1/50th of a second shutter speed. Well, what if it's a super bright sunny day and you have nothing on the front of your camera? There is no way that that video is going to look anywhere worth anything. Everything's going to be completely blown out and it's going to be worthless. So in order to get that shutter speed down to that 1/50th of a second, is basically you put sunglasses onto your camera. And those are called ND filters, neutral density filters. Basically like sunglasses, and they have different ranges from either just like a light shade to a heavier, depending on how much light there is on the ground. So if it's a bright sunny day in the middle of winter with snow all over the ground, which is going to be super bright, you're probably going to need like an ND 32 or 64 even filter on that on your lens in order to get your shutter speed down to 1/50th of a second. So use of ND filters and white balance. I mentioned earlier, I would highly recommend, wow, we've been doing this all on battery. I would highly recommend setting your white balance either with one of the presets or manually or whatever you want to do, but I wouldn't leave it in auto because you'll learn, you know, you'll have this cool shot, whatever, and all of a sudden the whole color like just flips to a different color, and you're like, what the hell just happened? And it's because your white balance was in auto. Yeah.
So your ND filters, are you, before you take flight, are you setting the camera up, have it on, view your image, and then go, okay, maybe I should put this ND filter on and look at it before you take off, and then? You
can. Here's the thing though, like, you can do that, but say you're sitting on the ground and like you're on a sidewalk with a sunny day and like it's super bright. You're like, oh man, I need like a ND 32 or whatever. You put it on there, you go up, you're shooting this shot that's like a 45-degree angle down. What's going to happen is it's nowhere near as bright, and now you're like, you can't, you know, get the image to expose properly because you're having to put your shutter speed way down.
Right.
Like, because that camera's picking up all this reflected light off the sidewalk and all that stuff. You put too big a filter on, and now you have to come out and change it. I've done it before, you know. Usually what I would do is try to take that into account, like once I get up there, I'm like, if I'm shooting straight down, like, you know, a 90-degree, like over something or whatever, you're not going to need as much filter as you think you are. Because, you know, depending on what you're over, like over blacktop or something like that, a lot of that light's going to get absorbed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Whereas if a lot of it's being reflected, you know, maybe you will. So it all just depends on, I mean, if you have to come down and change it, you come down and change it. It's not a big deal, you know. So that's kind of all I had for the video stuff, and then we'll do one more demo. If I can get that off the screen. Oops. I do it before. I don't know how to get this off. Here we go. So HDR we covered, and we're gonna do stitching. Panorama. Has anybody worked with, you do stitching, panorama type images and all that? I'm probably boring you to death, aren't I?
That's a refresher.
You raised your hand for
I
most
grew
of
up
it.
in film, right? So, come on.
Oh, very good. All right.
This is cheating.
So here's our 3 images down here we're going to take. Actually, it's 4 images. 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, I'll show you what these are. So this is a bridge. We're out. This is actually one of the things I worked with Matt on, I think. But we had this bridge. We're going to try to see if we could take, if we were close enough, if you could take sections of the bridge, put them all together so that you could then create a larger image and see the whole bridge in greater detail, right? As opposed to taking one image all the way back and getting the bridge in frame, get up close to it, and let's see if we can take a shot, take a shot, take a shot, take a shot, and then put that all together, create a large image that you can still zoom in on and have the detail still there. So that's what this is these are 4 different images of a bridge. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to take those, you highlight them all just like we did with the HDR, you right click, you go to photo merge again just like HDR, but this time you're going to do Panorama, which for some reason that's interesting. It's not going to let me do it.
Do you have to be in the Develop tab?
Maybe. It's saying the file cannot be found. Why would that be? Let's try this again. Essentially what it is kind of like the HDR. You're going to take each one of those images, you right click, like I said, you go up like you were going to do the HDR, but you do Panorama instead. It'll take all 4 of those images, it'll automatically combine them, it knows how to lay them out based upon what it can figure out through the algorithms. Long story short, since it's not going to let me do it, this is what you end up with. This one was already done. So these are, and I had already played with some of the color stuff here, but these are each one of those images. 1, 2, 3, and 4, all put together then. The computer automatically stitched them all together, and now you've got a much larger image that you're able to keep the quality as though it was one shot. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
It worked out pretty well as far as the zoom in, didn't lose anything?
You can zoom in. Now, every once in a while you get these little issues. See that?
Mm-hmm.
Little stitching issue. If you're good with Photoshop, it's easy to clean up. You can go into Photoshop and just, clone or whatever. But for the most part, you can see. Look at the detail. Like, you've got a lot of detail there that if you would have taken that same shot all the way back to get the full bridge in one shot, there's no way you'd have it.
So obviously, the advantage is you could make a much larger panorama than you could with a single image and still be clear without having pixelated, right?
Right.
Maybe you could talk about sort of the utility of this project and why that would be important for, like, for example, bridge inspections.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, for like a real world scenario would be being able to have this whole bridge and like a bridge inspector, if they were looking to inspect this. Like I was saying, if you took one shot, clear back here and zoom in, you're going to lose all kinds of detail. But if you're able to give them, and you can still do this with, giving them the single photos like going across, but it's kind of cool for them to be able to zoom in on all these different areas and have it in one image, and they can mark it all up as they need to on one image and say, hey, this is a spot. And now you can zoom in even more on this. Let me see. There we go. So, I don't know what percentage we're zoomed in here, but the little zoom box up here to show you how far in we are on that whole image.
Jason,
And you still have all
straight on, or did you move symmetrically?
This is just it's just panned across.
Aircraft steady, 1, 2.
Yeah,
3
just yaw.
versus 1,
Just
2.
shot. Yeah. But you can zoom all in, and they could do this as like a pre-inspection. Go in and find out obvious areas that they would need to go look at, or have somebody crawl around on the bridge, and instead of to those specific areas, instead of doing the whole bridge with a bunch of people or whatever, something like that would be time savings, cost efficient, all those things, where it would be very useful. There are other programs that you could use to do stitching. PT GUI, if you really want to get into like nitty gritty fun stuff. PT GUI, you could actually create 360-degree panoramas. I've done several of those. Got one downtown. Actually, one of the images earlier on the screen was a capture of the 360 we did last year.
Yep.
Microsoft Ice
downtown.
does a pretty good job too. The Microsoft Ice program.
Microsoft Ice is another one, and
It's
there's
free.
yeah, I haven't played with this. It's
Now you're talking.
is it good?
Yeah.
And then there's another one like Autopano. You play with that? No. You can do a lot with that too. PT GUI, they do kind of the same thing. PT GUI, like I said, you can do full 360 degrees. So instead of just taking 4 images, you can do a full 360 degrees. So you shoot in columns all the way around 360 degrees. You take all those pictures, you put it into PT GUI, and it tries its best to line up all those shots and put them all together. I still have issues trying to get it right. I usually have to go in and do all kinds of other tweaking, but it's kind of cool though. You can do 360 degree panoramas, create those. That is pretty much all I had, unless you guys have anything else for me.
Sir, I had a question I should ask you when you were talking about filters.
Yeah.
I was interested in what you were doing. Is there any use at all for polarizing filters?
Yeah. I haven't used them as much, but they are definitely useful. You can, polarizing filters, you can, and there's also gradient filters as well that you can use, put on the front. So instead of just having sunglasses where the whole thing is, you know, reducing the light at the same level across the whole frame, you can set it and line it up so that your sky then has more of a density than the lower half, right?
You could just bypass that with HDR in raw mode?
Well, for photography, I don't think I don't know. Photography, I don't know that I've never used them as much. I know you can. I just haven't. Most of what I have is just the regular ND filters. I should play with them more, but I haven't.
So polarized for glare on water.
Right. So
Yeah.
water or snow, anything reflective. If you don't have that, once it's in the photo, it's in the photo,
Okay.
right? So what the polarizer does is lines that up where it gets rid of that glare
Right.
or reflection.
Yeah. I mean, I could, you know, you could use it for both, I suppose. I just haven't, like for video and photography, I haven't used them as much. Play with them.
Yeah.
You have some?
Yeah, I mean, I used
Like the Polar Pro?
polarizers for regular photography. You know, I usually look at compose a shot, then I'll turn the polarizing lens to get the maximum elimination of glare. But once the drone's airborne, you can't really turn it at that point.
You have to try to get what you get,
Yeah.
like based upon what you think you're gonna get, and get what you get. Like, you know, like play with it, experiment, and you may have to come down and keep tweaking until you get it right for what the shot
The point about the glare is a good point.
Yeah.
That's very good.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I missed what you said about achieving that shot with the bridge. Did you move the drone, like you took it to the left, you took it, and then you moved the drone middle?
No.
So
No.
You stood in one spot in the middle?
Yeah, I would suggest not doing it that way.
Okay.
Because you're gonna have all kinds of issues.
Yeah.
Because with the drone, like you end up moving closer to it,
Right.
whatever, and there's gonna
Right.
be, you're throwing everything out. The best thing you do is just stay stationary
Yeah.
and you're just yawing left and right. Keep the camera the same where you want, you know, your framing to be, and leave that alone. Shoot your shot, just simple yaw to the right, shoot that shot, yaw, shoot it, yaw. And try to get, you know, at least, you know, 50-60% overlap, you know, or at least a good enough overlap on each of those images so that when they're combined, the computer has enough to work with to stitch it together. If you don't leave it enough, like you're gonna start getting gaps in the imagery, it's just not gonna have enough to work with, and it may not be able to stitch properly.
It's a good use of that grid that
Yeah.
you're looking at.
Absolutely, yes.
A perfect use for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
If you, if you find yourself getting in trouble with straight lines or anything, you can always go in using Photoshop, you go into the lens correction, and you can make a lot of adjustments to bring everything back into the right perspective too. So
Right, the lens correction, the bottom right. Yeah.
2 questions. In your video workflow, do you ever use Adobe Prelude or SpeedGrade?
I have not used either one.
So you handle everything within Premiere?
Say again?
So you handle everything within Premiere?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm not shooting Hollywood film or like even like going too crazy. I mean, no. but most of what I do for what I've been able to get away with is fairly simplistic, I guess.
Have you ever experimented with blend modes and pre-mode?
I have read tutorials and seen how to use it. I've never personally. I've only been using it for, to be honest, for like a year. So I'm still, I mean, it's always a learning process.
Yeah, you might want to experiment with duplicating your video track and then trying like a soft light blend mode, and then you can adjust the opacity on that. That has a lot of similar effect.
Right.
Polarizing.
Right. A lot of what I got a buddy who does, that's what he does for work, so I'm always asking him questions and he's teaching me and helping me with this, and so.
And another question on your still photography, have you used any software like Drone Deploy?
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you say that's the best out there, best bang for the buck out there, or is there something else?
What are you using it for? You're using it for mapping?
Yeah.
Probably Pix4D.
Pix4D?
Yeah. Yeah, Pix4D. There's Drone Deploy is, it's, I don't know. It's not that great for different reasons. I mean, I guess it depends on what you're trying to achieve.
You should probably talk about cloud versus supercomputer.
You're talking about that, but I mean, you don't have as much control over it as what you would like with Pix4D. I've also though heard. Is anybody else using Pix4D? Have you used it recently?
Mm-hmm.
Have you had any issues with it capturing images? I've heard that that's an issue with the new
I've had
software.
that issue, but I know why it was doing it. That was just a speed on the card.
Okay.
So
I've heard there's a glitch in the new one that people are running whole grids and realizing they have nothing after they get back on the ground. Yeah. You can usually see the flicker. Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why on your tablet you should have about 4 different programs. One is your go-to, and then your other 3 are ones. So
just not all open at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you used any of the cinematic effect filters on your videos at all?
Like what?
Like where you just run the filter over and it supposedly gives it that cinematic look.
The LUTs?
Yeah.
Like the LUTs? Yeah. I've got a bunch of different ones.
And do you find that you like it?
For doing the video stuff, yeah. Like it's almost like using like presets in Lightroom and stuff like that, where you have everything all set up. You click your presets, you can go through each one and see what it's doing to the image, and then tweak as from there. LUTs are pretty much it's the same thing for video.
Cool.
And there's a bunch. I mean, they're all over. I'm trying to think of what's the big one that Falcon or can't think of who it is. I'll look it up and email it to you. But you can buy like these packages that come with like 20 different LUTs in a package, and they have all these different colors and stuff that you can use.
I've been tempted to try it. So.
Yeah, definitely. Anybody else?
When you're doing mapping, what's your typical percentage on your front overlap and your side overlap?
I've heard it, as high as like 80%, 70%, 80% front to back, and at least 60% to the side. Does that match up with what you use?
We like
anybody else?
80.
Huh?
80-80.
80-80 on both sides. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. You don't want to skimp it because
you can't. It's a pain in the ass.
You're right. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, you're better off just getting way more than you need than, find out that you didn't have enough.
Could I ask for anyone that has any tips on mapping of architectural buildings?
Orbits?
Yeah. Is that, I've read about it, but I'd like to hear what Catherine
Yeah.
has to say.
45 and 30.
Oblique, yeah.
And then
oblique
watch
images.
your overhangs. Come back and get a 90 of it, because the program will make a curtain when we were looking at.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get underneath there, it helps the program figure that out.
One thing that I thought was a good analogy for that is spray painting. Like if you were spray painting the architecture, picture that you're spray painting, you want your drone sort of like the spray paint can to cover all the surfaces. So what always seems to be a challenge is doing an orbit at a low altitude, because obviously the lower you come to the ground, the more potential obstructions you have. But I just did one recently. We did 270 feet, 170 feet, and 80 feet. So, and that seemed to work out pretty good.
Should these orbiting pictures all be at the same radius from the center of the orbit, or can you take pictures closer in? Or would that make a difference at all?
Yeah, so the drone deploy app, which is free, has a grid plus orbit mode on it. So you can actually, it'll fly that, and
that'll come and do your orbit.
So I don't know if I know that the Pix4D app has a double grid feature, but I think you got to do manual orbits. But I can tell you the drone deploy automatic orbit is the same radius from the structure, all the way around.
Yeah, you pick the center.
Because I want to map a ship, which is a long
the USS Cod?
Yes, a long object. And I was torn between a perfectly circular orbit around it or an ovoid.
It'll be a free flight.
That's the one you choose?
Yeah. Chaz, he definitely a good source on that. He does a lot of that stuff. Jason too. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Just go shoot.
Just like Nike, except with cameras. Just go shoot. Well, thanks for your attention. I hope that's helpful to
Thanks, Jay. Appreciate it. Yeah. Usually do this at the beginning of the meeting, but big part of NOUASA is networking. These two guys are already working on a problem over here, so you see how this kind of works. But if we could just go around the room really quickly, and everyone can introduce themselves and tell how you fit into the drone community, the unmanned aircraft systems community. And I'll just tell you a couple more things. I am, in addition to my duties with NOUASA, I'm co-owner of DroneWorks LLC. We're a commercial drone services and equipment company. We've been in business since about early 2012. Along with Jason, I also work on the Drone Academy at Tri-C, which is, up to this point, has been for law enforcement, first responders, but as of January, will be expanded into general population. So if you don't have your 107 license and you're interested in it, and maybe interested in getting into an organized program to get you through the track and be ready to take that test with some instructor assistance, Tri-C will be offering that as of January, and it's probably going to expand to multiple classes. So if you're interested in the January class, maybe sign up pretty soon. Maybe Jose, you can start it.
Yeah, good evening, Jose Borges with the FAA, the local point of contact for anything UAS in Northern Ohio. Beside that, I've been into the RC community, drone community for 30 plus years. Been building, designing, fly my own stuff, crash and repair like everybody else. Avionics is my line of specialty, anything electronics, a lot of radio frequencies, transmitters, FCC issues, I knowledge that. Been working of assisting Matt or being part of the team of NOUASA since its inception a few years ago, and I know most of the people in the audience. Being more than happy to provide assistance and answer questions as long as I can.
I'm Patty Austin. I'm the owner of Curious About Flying. I'm in on the educational aspect. I specialize in introductory classes, and I have a class that's very basic to teach people who are on the recreational side of what they need to get their 107 license. So I'm in on the education.
Well, I'm John Bradrick. I'm just a hobbyist, enthusiast with it. So compared to the experience I've seen in this room tonight, I'm kind of a lower level, but I'm sure grateful for some of the things I've learned tonight already, so thank you very much.
My name is Chad Hankins. I use our drones for everything I get my hands on. Surveying, building inspection, bridge inspection, wetland delineation, all sorts of fun stuff with drones in the engineering world. So, been doing that for about 2 years now.
Mike Shaler had 30 plus years in the video business, and self-employed now, do websites and online marketing, Google AdWords and stuff, and decided that one of the tools I'd like to have would be a drone for my video work. So I got my 107 and been trying to build up some business doing that, and interested in doing some mapping and stuff like that, but I haven't really had a chance to do any of that.
Just go shoot.
There you go.
Okay, so my name is Daryl Smith. I own Advanced Image Solutions. It's about 2 years old now, down in Stark County. I'm probably the farthest, anybody farther south in Stark County here? Probably not. So I'm also the pilot in command for the Ohio Special Response Team. We have a drone program with 2 Inspire 1s with FLIR, et cetera, like, you know, things like that. We're a statewide voluntary search and rescue unit. If anybody's interested, please check out the website. Get in touch with somebody. We're always looking for pilots. We've only got 5 throughout the state right now, PICs. So that's about it.
Neil Mulbrew, more or less a hobbyist, second generation RC. Been at it for myself for 35 years. Also, as we stated earlier at the beginning, I'm the contest director for the Cleveland National Air Show UAS demonstration. That's about it.
My name's Joe Phillips. I'm a video technician, been in video production for a long time. I do a regular job every day of video production, and it seemed to be getting boring doing the same thing over and over, so I started my own side business, and I've been doing videos for people and different things, but I figured drones was a whole different aspect of how I can bring this into projects. So I bought a couple drones, and it's become more of a hobby and more something I could put into videos I'm making for people. So I'm just trying to learn more and more that I can, and just use. My biggest thing is I need to use it more. It's more practice, more practice. So I just been trying to watch videos, tutorials, play with it as much as possible, and just learn as much so I can give it to clients, you know, a different aspect than just your regular point and shoot interviews and stuff like that. So
the awe factor.
Yeah, yeah, right.
My name is Ron Michael. I work with the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. We have a certificate of authorization to fly. I'm a proud graduate of the Drone Academy at Tri-C, where after we got our Part 107. At the sewer district, we're looking at getting into mapping. Since we have a stormwater program now, we're looking at tracking erosion rates on the streams. Down in Macedonia, there was a massive storms that came through, so we kind of looked at some of the video there to get some of the woody debris out of the streams, things like that. Construction sites, we got $3 billion worth of construction happening in Northeast Ohio, so we're looking at getting into some of that. But slowly starting to grow our drone program.
Emilio Borges, started out with RC airplanes. My dad actually got me into it. Did the whole build, fly, crash, flew several times. Then got into drones about 4 or 5 years ago. Moved into some of the drone racing with the guys over here. And recently, earlier this year, started a Ohio drone company. We're technically based in Cincinnati because that's where my business partner is and our office is, but I'm up here. I do flights up here. We've done a lot of video and photography projects, but because my background education is in engineering, software, electronics, we're moving more into the technology development of it. We're looking to do infrastructure inspection like a lot of you guys are, essentially making our own specialized vehicle for getting up close and personal with the bridge and doing more detailed inspection and analysis with that. So that's where things are moving, you know, from the photography, still doing some projects with that, but also more into the technology side with customized vehicle and technology with that.
My name is Scott Blocker. I'm a captain with the Willoughby Fire Department. I'm in charge of Lake County's Public Safety UAS program, which is made up of police and fire in the county, and it serves on the fire side, obviously, the special teams also hazmat technical rescue. And on the law enforcement side, SWAT team, bomb squad, just normal law enforcement in the crime lab. So that program, we've been working on it for a few years, but we got off the ground here about 8 months ago. I think we went live with it. We have a fleet of Inspires and Matics and thermal cameras, so I'm having trouble with one. I was going to pick, actually I'll pick both your brains. And there are the crazy RC guys too, because having some trouble with some signal. But anyways, that's my background, so that's
another Tri-C graduate, right?
No, I teach.
But didn't you go through the program too? Or was
No,
I way
no.
off? All right.
No, I wasn't that smart.
Disregard. You were smarter than I saved the teacher.
Those who can do.
It was pity.
Right.
My name is Bill Scheck. I'm a freelance photographer and videographer. Just fascinated with this industry. Hard to keep up. It seems to change every week. Bought my first drone and had my first flying lesson from Matt Nishak.
I remember that. Did a good job.
My name is Dave Borman. I'm just a hobbyist. I've got a toy drone, and that's as far as I've got. Not a toy, it's a tool. A tool. A tool. That's what I have to tell everybody when they start buzzing on me.
Yes.
I'm Marlon Linger. I work for OAI and NASA. I run drone workshops for college students in the state of Ohio. Right now we have a competition going on for solar-powered drones and VTOL.
My name is Dana Clark. My company is Flyby Video Pros. My son and I started about 3 years ago, primarily as sales for DJI, as a DJI dealer. 2 years ago we started Ohio Drone Repair. We do primarily drone repairs, mainly DJI for that. I promise you, we stock more parts than anybody you will ever know for DJI. I'm highly invested with them. This year we started Ohio Drone School, which is doing a lot of education for the enthusiasts and hobbyists. We've also had an opportunity to work with law enforcement and fire departments. And this year we're really excited because we were doing it out of the house for 3 years, and by December 1st we're moving into our building. And so that's the next step for us. So awesome to be here with so many people that are really into it and have the 107 as well. So
Dana, where are you located? Where are you moving in?
North Ridgeville.
Oh, awesome.
You could have did that.
He could have.
I'm Drew Camden. I work for Rotor Riot. We specialize in freestyle drones, making entertainment content with them and producing parts for them and products, kind of building a culture around that community. I don't know if I can tell you more.
I'm Chad Capper. I got into the hobby of RC flight in about 2009. Started a YouTube channel called Flight Test in 2010, and then Rotor Riot in 2016. And that's what I do now.
Hey Chad, maybe you could talk a little bit about what freestyle is, maybe.
Yeah, I guess maybe a lot of people don't. So people know what drone racing is. Freestyle is, I guess, the artistic form of that flight. So it's kind of like interpretive dance in the air. And people post their videos on YouTube as the outlet of choice. And right now, I think it's mostly pilots watching other pilots, so it's not quite mainstream, but it is growing. And we just started making performance parts, starting with motors. We have a camera that we created for FPV. We work with Runcam on that, and we've got a whole host of new products that are coming out this year.
Our frame came out like today, right?
Oh yeah, we just released a frame today.
The God Remix, rotorriot.com.
Get them while they're out.
Lonnie King, started flying drones 2011, now a commercial operator, and went away from that. Now I'm a pretty much full-time drone racer, so travel everywhere, get to race these things at high speeds. It's a lot of fun. That's what I like to do.
Yeah, hi, I'm Mike Pyle. I used to run the Ohio Aerospace Institute here. Retired last year, but I kind of got with Matt and we started this relationship between OAI and NOUASA. But currently I serve on the Ohio Aerospace and Aviation Technology Committee, which is a legislative committee by the Ohio State Legislature on aerospace and aviation topics. So there's a big move to make the state of Ohio the leading drone state in the nation. So, you know, we want to try to do everything from a policy perspective to help make that happen.
Awesome. Yeah, you know, I forgot, Mike, but, you know, definitely a big thanks to OAI for giving us this forum. This is a beautiful building, great place to come, and OAI offered this to us. And if you didn't know, speaking of Ohio being, you know, sort of the drone capital, in addition to being, you know, the birthplace of aviation, the first drone, the Kettering Bug or Kettering Aerial Torpedo, invented in Ohio. First quadcopter, the both of that Flying Octopus, also invented right here in Ohio. So it's pretty cool. This is, in a way, historically, the drone capital of the world.
I'm Bruce Bishop, Chief Photographer at the Chronicle Telegram in Elyria, working on bringing drones to the paper, and I shoot commercially on the side, so obviously drone's going to be a good fit there too. Been hanging around with Matt, listening to him say that carbon fiber is stronger, many ways stronger than steel for about 5 or 6 years now. So.
Yeah, Mike Hanna, I'm Matt Meshak's business partner. I also teach up at Tri-C, the design and manufacturing aspect of it. We like to build drones to the specific needs of the individual, for law enforcement, and I speak at Akron College to the engineer senior class on how to get started into the entrepreneurial system.
Awesome. Thanks. Did everybody sign into the list here? So just so everybody's clear, I'm going to take this list and I'll put everybody on the listserv. NOUASA doesn't send out that many emails. One question, actually, I think Joe, you brought it up, is that you don't fly enough.
Yes.
If NOUASA sponsored sort of a meet and fly event, would anybody be interested in that type of thing? All right, there seems to be a lot of interest in that. Would anybody be interested in helping organize? Less hands on that second part.
As expected.
Okay, but Lonnie, you would? And anybody else who maybe help? Neil would? Oh, Chad? Okay. Maybe we can may I talk to you guys about doing a committee and doing some of that. Maybe we'll pick some interesting sites, and maybe we could do a little bit of commercial photography, maybe have it a themed event, and maybe we can even have a freestyle. Maybe we could kind of show people what that's all about, because I know Lonnie was a pretty enthusiastic commercial drone photographer, and then somebody showed him an FPV racer, and he was
I cannot afford another hobby. Please don't bring that.
YouTube.com/roadtour.
Okay, one thing I didn't mention is that I do, as a professor, I'm an attorney, so I'm kind of heavily involved in the drone legal aspect. So if you need a card, if you need any information about that, sometimes it seems like it comes up a lot. I'm talking to Jose a lot. So, you know, if you're trying to get some authorizations or have some questions about the law, I can also help answer those questions for you.
Or if you get into trouble.
If you get into trouble, I can also, no one gets into trouble though. That's what never happens. So, any general questions for anybody?
You have, maybe you or Jose, could you address the FAA's drone integration program with LE and public safety? Any ideas? Anything on that
program?
No.
The integration between. Oh, okay. So the FAA. You want to talk about it, or?
Yeah, has been recently published by the new administration. The idea is to reach out to other government entities in the country, state government, local governments, tribal groups that may have interest to develop or integrate drone technology into their programs. Like who's the erosion control water sewage?
Sewer district.
Something like that. Let's say we have a tribal that it wants to scout and map their canyons or lands. That's the kind of program that this new integration is looking after. There's also another side of it that deals with reach out to industry in the development of new ideas. after this, I need to make the, I need to say this. The FAA doesn't have any money. This doesn't mean that the FAA is going to give grants to anyone. The way this works is that companies or industry are developing their technology and they reach out to the FAA to make them a partner. In exchange, the FAA will help them secure a piece of airspace for them to do their research. 3 examples I can mention. There's one by the train company, BSNF.
Right.
Is that the way it goes?
Yeah.
Yeah, the train people.
Yeah,
They have a program going that they are making, developing drones to fly beyond line of sight to inspect tracks. And they have, I don't know how many hundreds of miles of track. And the FAA allocated a piece of airspace over those tracks that they can run their tests. Virginia Tech, which is working with Amazon in developing the drone delivery system. So that's a program. There's one in Alaska that they are doing offshore surveillance. One of those forgotten places that they have, but their drones are like $100,000 drones. They operate their radio system is worth more than God, who knows. They make their own radios. I mean, we're talking really high-end equipment. Well, the FAA is working with them, securing a piece of the coast for them to go and explore and do their thing. So, upcoming that are going to be part of the partnership that we already know about Amazon. Google is coming with their own idea. Walmart is coming with their own ideas. Mostly, not to be discouraged, but mostly the heavy hitters. We are talking corporation with multi-million-dollar investments. So that's what this program is more geared to.
Daryl, were you talking about the local government program? Is that the one with local governments?
Pretty much. I mean, but that's the gist of it for now. I mean, it's new.
Yeah, this is
I mean,
a multifaceted approach. It's the government, small government part, it's the industry technology development, and there's the other heavy hitters.
Right.
Are you thinking for SAR? SAR?
No, that's different. That's a different aspect. The SAR thing.
Search and rescue.
Yeah.
I know that Chief Clayton Harris at Tri-C, and they're exploring, doing some things within Cleveland. So if you're talking about that new Trump program, where the FAA works with local municipalities, city government to sort of fast track special permissions for special projects, you may want to reach out to Clayton Harris on that.
Well, I wasn't, but I will reach out.
Yeah, there are some people anxious to get Cleveland some special. And Cleveland is a unique city because we have a Class D airport right there. So it presents some unique challenges.
Well, what about the program where for the municipalities to come over and regulate 0 to 200, and then 200, 400 being back to the FAA? Is there any footage on that?
Those are rumors.
Okay.
Yeah, every municipality will wish to regulate the airspace, but
there's no meat to it.
There's a long history of precedent, really stretching back to 1946, where it's something called field preemption, where basically the federal government controls the airspace, and it's, to put it in very simple terms, are you on the field? Yes. Are you with the federal government? No. Get off. There's no room for public or for a local or state government to regulate the airspace. Once you're up in the air, you're in Jose's jurisdiction. Now that so you think, well, hey, maybe things aren't usually flying under 200 feet, right? Maybe the municipalities could kick in here. But the thing you have to think about is drones are pretty small. They're not carrying cargo right now, but they will. And if you think about in terms of interstate commerce, right? Imagine, so there's a case about planes where they had liquor service on the airplane, and Arizona wanted it because normally FAA regulations deal with safety, but Arizona wanted it so you couldn't serve drinks while flying over the state of Arizona. Just imagine that. So the Supreme Court ruled that no, maybe it's not such a safety thing whether you serve alcohol on the plane at that altitude. I don't know, maybe it is. I don't know how much alcohol you're serving, right? It depends. But they ruled, hey, no, that's in the province of the. So if you think about it, if Amazon gets their way and they're sort of going even between states delivering goods, if you have to fly as you're flying, figure out, hey, what are the rules in this state? What are the rules in that state? The old logic still applies. I don't think that you're going to see preemption, done away with regard to that. Now, local and state governments can still regulate with police power, so you can control takeoff and landing zones through zoning.
Which is what the FAA tells you how to do it if you're a municipality. You say you
Do
can't
they?
take off
So
and land.
we don't really want that. I mean, that makes it.
Yeah, that kind of, you put up an argument right there. You put the other people on the defense.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, people are adjusting to this technology that we're using, right? I mean, there's one statement by, a very young Justice Brandeis way back when. He said that this new invention, this technology is going to ruin privacy as we know it. And it could be said about the drone, right? But he was actually talking about the handheld Kodak camera in 1898. So, we always go through this adjustment process. And, what Neil and the rest of the group has been doing at the air show helps out a lot with that. Because I remember in 2014, we had people coming in with their arms crossed and saying, hey, I'm going to shoot these things down, like that kind of attitude. And then when they learned about it, that really changed to childlike fascination with the technology. It really melted away pretty quickly. And Neil, I don't know, I mean, at this last air show, I didn't see any of that. People were pretty much enthusiastic, curious. You didn't have all that negativity. But when we started, that is all it was.
I was going to ask, Cuyahoga Heights has, an ordinance where you can't take off and land and you can't fly over anything public unless you get authorization from them. Are there any other communities in the area that have those on their local ordinances, or
well, I would treat those takeoff and landing ordinances as presumptively valid. I know that the Lorain County Metro Parks over here had one, and I was used to going, what is this stuff? This is going to be preempted by federal law. But I actually looked at it. Was drafted in 1968, and I looked at it, and I'm like, man, this is legit. They're actually controlling. They have a special jurisdiction within their parks, and they can control takeoff and landing. So
Metro Parks does the same thing.
yeah, it was completely legit regulation. So if it's worded that way, City of Cleveland has a drone ordinance, right? That it's minor misdemeanors, punishable by fines. Well, there's been case law on that. So it basically says, the City of Cleveland says that whatever's legit with the FAA is legit with us, but there's going to be penalties. Well, that's something called parallel legislation, right? It just parallels the federal legislation, doesn't do anything additional, doesn't take away. That's also preempted. That's no good. I hate to tell you, City of Cleveland, but your ordinance would not pass constitutional muster. But you have to remember the timeline where that was passed. The RNC was coming into town, and there was a lot. That was a time, remember, that was right after the Dallas shootings, and there's a lot of paranoia in the air. So that had a lot to do with what they did over there. But I hope that answers your question. And if you want, you're going to send it to me. I can take a look at it and show you some comments on it.
Matt, I would like to elaborate on that a little bit. All this is coming from a lot of concern of things happening sometimes overseas in other countries, and applications that drone have been given in other places. You may know or not know that in countries like Syria and Iraq, they are using DJI drones to attach grenades and fly them over targets and just release the grenades. Yep. And because of that, then the security departments in this country are, validly concerned that something like that could happen here. On the other hand, then they learn out that the Department of Defense was using the same DJI to do surveillance on the areas. Then they found out that the software updates ended up going to China along with the fly logs and everything else. So they suspended the use of DJI. There's a lot going on with the technology. You really don't know where it's going to end up going or who is going to end up using it. Out of a lot of caution, then the law enforcement and defense departments in this country are really cautious and nervous, if you will, in having these drones flying over crowded, congested areas with everything that is going around the world, terrorist attack. Who's to say that some bad actor is not going to use one of these to create another disaster, right? So I am of the belief that we are more users that have legitimate, valid uses, good uses for drone. Unfortunately, it only takes one or two then to ruin it for everybody. And Matt knows me, and some of the guys here know me Neil knows me for a long time. I am as pro-drone, pro-RC as anyone can be. I mean, I would like to see everybody having a good time. But unfortunately, not everybody is good intended. I mean, there are people that are mean, that has problems with their brains. So, going back to the topic of cities and local governments, which has always been my suggestion. Again, I'm the lowest Indians on the totem pole when it comes to legislation. My suggestion has always been why cities do not segregate a section apart. If you have a drone and you want to fly for recreation, this area in this city, the city already designated to be a drone-friendly area. Go fly in this park to your heart content. No one has any business to fly over a power station or over an industrial complex. There's no place for a drone there. If there is a need, then work with the authorities. Get your permission, get your permit, get your 107, go and fly. But I think there could be a good arrangement for everybody, so everybody could be happy. If you are a hobby photographer and you want to take your pictures for your weekend, you want to have your birthday party, your wedding in a park, sure, go for it. Just notify the authorities, get your permission, get your sleep, and go have fun. But unfortunately, not everybody works like that. From my side of the fence, and some of you may know, we do receive a lot of phone calls on a monthly basis. So-and-so is flying without the 107, so-and-so is flying too high, or so-and-so is flying too close to the airport. I get them. I get all those phone calls, and I look at them. We may not take action right away, but we do eventually. I thank your input. I thank your phone call. I thank your advice and information. And without going in too many directions at once, but that's just sharing my point of view of what's going on behind the curtains that some of you may not be aware of.
Thanks. Well, on that note, it is after 8 o'clock, so OAI has asked that we take our leave at, I don't know if you want to stick, I'm going to, as we exit, I'll stick around in case anybody has any questions. Please join the NOUASA Facebook page. And would you be interested in a private group on NOUASA for discussing some of these issues? Maybe we should start that as well. Okay. All right, maybe I'll start that. But please, in the meantime, it's a good way to keep up with what's going on, and I'll put everybody on the list. Everyone did sign, right? Everyone said they signed? Okay. Thanks a lot. Thanks for coming tonight, guys. Appreciate it.
You get a new toy. A little bit.
It's nice because it'll say where you're at.
Nice to meet you.
Still going. You just can't help yourself, can you?
Oh, yeah.
I think I was.
Oh, are you? Oh, all right.
DroneOhio.com.